Thank you, Amol. Standing here with vice presidents and COOs and CEOs, I'm feeling rather short, which you can realize is quite easy for me. But I'm going to talk a little bit about rethinking timetables in the interdisciplinary approach. Now, I would like you to consider the context one more time. Where are we situated at this point in time? So we are talking about human beings' innate ability to store the memory, not only inside, but outside of his or her body. That is a very, very powerful thought. Probably we are the only organism that are able to store our memory. And not only do I have access to my memory, I have access to yours if you choose to share that with me. We have newer problems that need systemic thinking. So we are talking big about the fresh air and water, and these are things that are affecting us globally. It is not affecting a group of people, but it's affecting everyone. We have disruptive technology, and you've been listening to this all this time, right, since the morning. We have the augmented reality, we have the nanotechnology, we have materials that can think for themselves, self-healing, self-cleansing. That is quite advanced. We have automation, and of course we have IoTs and so on. So that is quite a disruptive technology, and we have disruptive trends in education itself. And we're talking about things like MOOC, education which was once controlled by teachers and by organizations is now readily available. So the contexts are quite different. Finally, we are talking about the collaborative consumption or the sharing economy. So we're talking about Uber, or we're talking about Airbnb. These are very different contexts to what we have been used to all this while. So I would like to just go back to seeing the strategic objective of education in the society. And for me, Ken Robinson's aim of education, this, I think, really sums up the strategic objective of education at this point in time. So the aims of the education are to enable students to understand the world around them and the talents within them so that they can become fulfilled individuals and active, compassionate citizens. If that is to happen, we do need to rethink the curriculum design, the delivery, as well as the assessment. We are talking about developing conceptual understandings, the learning behaviors, and the attitudes towards learning. So it's quite different. We're talking about online interactions, we're talking about in-class, and of course out-of-school interactions for all our learners. We're talking about assessment for as well as with learning. So we are looking at a model which is no longer disciplinary, but it's getting into interdisciplinary and further down into a transdisciplinary model. Now, if you're a teacher, I would like to ask you, now I'm not sure if I can do the Joey, but how you doing? And I don't know about you, but sometimes I feel that this is what I am. So I feel like I'm juggling quite a few things, as are our students. Now, rethinking the timetable. As of now, all our schools, or most of our schools, have an entry criteria including age. So there is an age cutoff. So that is a constant. There is a timetable, so time is a constant. Do you ever consider learning? Is learning a constant? Or do you move from English to maths, to science, to PE, to music, to art, regardless of whether or not the child has learned? So when does learning become a constant? And that is a consideration that I would like to talk about today. Make learning a constant. Second thing, we are talking about design thinking. You need to have time for design thinking. Design thinking does not happen if you're asked to move from one course to the other within a span of 40 minutes. By the time you engage in something, it's time for you to move forward. So you need time. Thirdly, a timetable needs to acknowledge the individuality of learners and needs to respect that. Is your timetable respectful of the learners, their pace, their ability? Who has the ownership of the place, the pace, the time with learners? Should it be us? And finally, does our timetable allow for collaboration? And that is something, these are some of the considerations that I made when we talked about rethinking the timetable. Now, when you look at flexible scheduling, we need to look at learners who can access modified and personalized approaches, participate in other experiences. I just had one of my ex-students coming back to me. He's now an international go-kart champion. But 8 years ago, when he was in my class, I needed to completely modify his learning because he could not attend the class. So he had to go for training programs outside of Singapore. How did we modify? We needed to be flexible for him to achieve that goal that he's achieved now. Again, you would be having a lot of students who would be having that. So there needs to be that time where learners can invest their time in other experiences. In addition to that, again, as I said, learners need to own the path and the time. So I propose today that we do away with this timetable, and it looks something like this. Utopia? Well, I haven't achieved it yet, just to let you know. So what we are moving towards, though, is something that looks like this. Now, again, these are very, very small changes, but I think that they're really, really moving towards big things. So this is a timetable actually from my school, where there are big blocks, and you can see just unit of inquiry, integrated learning. There are huge blocks of that. And the only thing that is marked is additional languages or some of the specialists, because like you, like everyone, I do have school constraints, and being an administrator, I'm quite mindful of the HR as well as the budgeting for the staffing. So this is what our timetable looks like. Again, the difference between traditional and flexible timetables is that flexible timetables allow the learners that control over the time, the path, the pace of learning. There's ownership of learning as well, plus there is time for design thinking along with personalized learning goals. One of our students actually, since the last 2 years, has not been attending many of her language lessons because she's actually working on what she can do after she grows up in terms of saving the dolphins. That is such a high-thinking process, and she's been doing that since she was 7. So she's been working on her program, changing it year after year, but that is something that we needed to think of if we needed to personalize that program. We talk about paving the way for collaborative and self-directed learning. Now, students have many more skills today. Yesterday, I was sitting in the maker session of our school, and I had a 13-year-old giggling away because she was trying to teach me 3D pen doodling, and I had no idea. So I was sitting there trying to learn from her, and it brings me back to the very first or the second presentation today, saying that the learners are not in our classes, we are in theirs. And that is something that I would like to really, really consider for all of us to have a think about. There are lessons from the Hole in the Wall project by Sugata Mitra, whereby the teachers' roles have changed massively. The learners are now way more self-directed. And that is something, again, to consider when you're considering a timetable. There is, of course, the continually evolving, changing content of knowledge, and I love the Pluto here, from being a planet to not being a planet to being a dwarf planet. That's continually evolved. So how are we keeping pace with the changing content of knowledge? And finally, we have the age barrier that's been transcended. We have Malala Yousafzai winning a Nobel Prize at the age of 17. So these are some of the considerations that we made when we were looking at our timetable. And I'm not saying that my school has completely done away with the timetable, but this is where we are headed. The teacher's roles need to be rethought. Teacher no longer is a sage on stage, but the teacher needs to be a facilitator who provides the hook and develops rich tasks for learning, manages logistics for learning, the content, the resource, the area, the time, and also personalizes for needs, from strengths as well as for challenges. The teacher needs to be a learner. So we're talking about the investment and valuing of lifelong learning. We're talking about modeling learning attitudes as well as the behaviors. Plus, teacher being a researcher. One of the best things that I learned from way before was not to look into educational professional development when I am a teacher, but to look at professional development outside the industry. If I am going to teach our children for working in the industry, why should my professional development be completely looking inside or looking inwards? And that is something for all of us to consider. Teacher as a researcher, again, reflects on self, practices, as well as pedagogies. So again, there is a role which has completely changed for the teachers. These are our teachers, and we, this year, have a focus on creativity. So our teachers are actually playing. This year, we've given time for our teachers to play. And one of the things that we'd like to do is to make sure that our teachers are actually playing with the robots, the blue bots, they're playing with the 3D doodle pens, they're playing with the IoT, the augmented reality, virtual reality. So that is something that our teachers need to do in order to make sure that they're comfortable in presenting it to the children and also playing with the children. Rethinking learner roles, so we're talking about learners who are really, really curious. We're thinking about learners who are independent, willing to give it a go, confident and collaborative. And that is something that we try to develop. The role of technology, I'm quite certain that since the morning, you have heard quite a bit about what the role of technology is. And I actually refuse to mention it anymore simply because I am not mentioning a pencil or a pen right now in my presentation. Neither should I mention technology. It is an inherent part of our education, and that's what it needs to be. We're talking about Now and Pepper, and again, we heard about that in the IMDA presentation this morning. They're working with the preschoolers. It's a norm now. It's nothing new. We're talking about MOOCs, Coursera, Udemy, which not only allows the students, allows the teachers to move forward with their learning. Timetabling softwares for learners, where they can go themselves and they do the timetabling for themselves instead of the administrators or the teachers doing the timetabling for them. We're talking about flipped learning platforms, Khan Academy, which really does not need the teacher to be there. But the teachers can now focus on big-time design thinking elements. Of course, we have the social media, plus we have the Web 2.0, 3.0, and now we're moving forward to the 4.0. So these are some technological trends that we are going to have to consider in our classroom. In an evolving leadership role, we need to rethink who are we procuring the content for? Because I'm not sure that I am ready to procure content for digital natives when I myself am a digital immigrant. I'm just going to show you a couple of vignettes of practice from my own school. They're very simple, but I just thought I'll share them regardless so that you can see what I am talking about when I talk about design thinking. What does it look like in the classroom? So conceptual understanding for our grade ones was that people tell stories in a variety of ways to express, entertain, and explain the world. Now, storytelling, as you know, is quite important. Right now, I'm telling you a story. You tell stories all the time. You tell stories to your teachers, to your spouses, to your children, to your bosses, and storytelling is essential. So we left it with our children. Instead of telling them to write a story, we asked them a question, how can we tell a story? And look what we came up with. Before we started that, we gave the teacher had a role. The teacher's role was to provide a hook. She asked the question. The hook was the question. The teacher ensured a variety of materials and space, and of course, a flexible schedule. So we had a completely disrupted schedule whereby children had their flexibility of moving in and out of the classroom, going to different places of the school, and trying their own projects. The 3 questions that were asked in the planning process were, what is your story going to look like? What resources would you need? And what are the roles and responsibilities of the members? And children were asked to document the plan. This is what came up, and this was grade 1. So there were clay stories, there were collaborative posters, books, puppets, iPads, and then it eventually morphed to even number stories. And students took 3 days to plan, to process, to present, and also to assess that. Now, technology was an inherent part of that because art students took the iPads, they moved around, they took photographs, they built up their own stories. The flexible timetabling ensured that there was no disruption in their thinking and that they could take their project and design through. Learners were responsible for planning, sourcing, creating, documenting, presenting, and assessing. The same thing happened with grade 7s. Their conceptual understanding was migration impacts people in a variety of ways. They looked at the refugee crisis, and their rich task was to create a narrative from the perspective of a migrant. I'll just give you half a minute to read this. It gave me the chills. The night is as dark as the inside of a cave. I'm scared. I don't know if I can continue. I can taste the sea salt in the air. I take a seat inside the dinghy. One of the smugglers comes to me and says, if the boat starts to sink, stay away from the other passengers. This gave me goosebumps when I read it. It's my grade 7, writing it from the perspective of a refugee. Hidden in a lorry. This was another student, same class. It felt cold, it was dark. The blackness made me feel like I was losing my balance. This is what refugees hear, feel, and see when they think they are on a boat, when they are on a boat or in a car. It feels like an eternity. When grade 7s were looking at migration and refugees, the flexi timetable gave an opportunity for our grade 4s to go on a collaboration action. And our grade 4s, who were doing something on rights and responsibilities, decided to take independent student action and did a fundraiser for charity. So that was something that was really, really powerful. Grade 7s doing refugee, migrants, and crisis in a narrative style, but the independent student action. These are 8-year-olds I'm talking about, and we finally ended up with $700 collection. 8-year-olds, 10 of them came together, did everything from scratch without teacher input. At 8-year-olds, for an 8-year-old, I think that is something really, really impressive. School culture and management is really, really essential. If we want to have this kind of a flexi schedule, the culture needs to be supportive of that. We do have our leaders who are very, very supportive of what we are doing. We do need professional development for our staff as well as for ourselves. But most of all, we need to be able to celebrate innovation. And that is something really, really essential. I come back to Sir Ken Robinson's quote. If you are an education system based on standardization and conformity that suppresses innovation, individuality, don't be surprised if that's what you get. So just make sure that that is not your school. We need a society of individuals that can work collaboratively, creatively, and competently. And you know what? You are the educators and you can do it. Thank you, everyone.